Hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I am your host, Brian Keith Bowen, resident Christian apologist. We're going to do a fourth installment of When Skeptics Respond. I know I did one very recently that uploaded very recently, but this will be the last one for a while, unless I really feel the urge to comment on some posts and that. But I figure by now you pretty much got a pretty good idea how skeptics typically respond to us on the internet. Today we're going to be doing something a little differently. Not only are we not having to go through as many posts as we did before. I mean, we're going through posts, but not nowhere near as many. We're going to be able to pretty much, probably, maybe do this video within an hour's worth of time, or less. I'm going to try to, that'll be my aim. I got some more stuff that I need to tell you about that I'm announcing in this video. But as far as this is going to be a little different than what the others were. We're still going to be on the subject matter of how skeptics typically respond, but there's another category that we've never really addressed in this series. What happens when the skeptic's problem isn't a head issue, but a heart issue? See, the head and the heart has to be pretty much on the same page. You have to be able to intellectually be able to think through it and have a rationale for your justification for why you believe what you believe. But your heart also has to be able to be part of the decision of accepting certain truths. It's not just simply cognitively accepting them. It's got to be something that your heart has to be in on the decision. But it can't be just your heart, because your heart can be deceived. It can't be just your mind, because your mind can be deceived. It has to be both. Your mind, you can be deceived by, and I deal, as a Christian apologist, I deal with people who has deceptions all the time. So people can get their minds deceived. But people also can get their hearts deceived as well. Today, last few days, I've been talking to a person who apparently praised Bart a bit. I called him a Bart Ehrman worshiper. I did it in fun and joking around. He took it seriously at first. But in any given case, he uplifted Bart in his eyes, but he actually agreed with me that I might be right about Bart, about his arguments, about what he says. He even thinks I might even be right about the possibility that Bart Ehrman might be wrong about something. And he's fine with that. In fact, he said he didn't really care. He said he started going into some details about how he got hurt at a church that apparently didn't take to his particular situation where he doubted and questioned certain things, and in fact they ridiculed him for questioning it, and he was offended for it, and I guess it hurt him. And then Bart Ehrman comes along and he's questioning the norm, and he's challenging, and he's telling people it's okay to doubt, and so that made him think, oh, you know, here's a guy that's you know, our hero that's you know, stepping up to the plate. The problem, however, is that it matters to believe the right thing. It's not. I don't have a problem. I'm one of those people that do not think that just because you doubt that somehow that's bad. I don't teach people that it's bad you doubt and question this. Don't question this. Just believe what I say. Don't question anything. I don't think that's a proper way to handle anything. For one thing, when you do that, you got, you know, like it's kind of like picking out a scab. You pick it out enough, eventually it gets worse. Well, if you have doubts building up in someone's mind, if those doubts go unanswered and unresolved and they're just there, what happens is the human mind will constantly pick at those doubts until those doubts become more than just doubts. I believe that we ought to not look at doubts as a bad thing, but rather as a way of, okay, you have these doubts, now let's find you some answers. Let's actually dig into this. Let's actually resolve this. 1 Peter 3:15 says to give every man an answer for everyone an answer for the hope that is in them with humility and respect. And I believe that. This idea of, oh, you have doubts. No, you can't have doubts. We're not going to deal with that. No. Because it turns people into this, as we'll see. And you shouldn't do that. Now, of course, on his end, he shouldn't let offenses rule his thinking either. In his mind, he thinks that as long as your heart is in whatever it is, it doesn't matter what's true. It doesn't matter what anyone says. It doesn't matter whether anyone argues truth. In fact, he kept telling me that I'm just about my head. And I said, no, it's about the head and the heart. And I said that in the last post I sent to him, as we will see. But we're going to dive into this. It's more briefer as far as the post, because we weren't really in a debate. It was more of a discussion. And it was nothing bad. But I do think that it's something that we need to, as a community, come together and it's not a bad thing to question something as long as you can provide the answers. But trying to question something and not seek out the answers is just as bad as people who think it's wrong to question. And we ought not do either one of those. It's not, okay, you have doubts, okay, let's find out what those doubts are about. Let's find out whether or not, if there's any warrant to it. And that's what I want to talk about today. But in the meantime, we're going to cue this on. In the meantime, we're going to cue this on and we're going to play this. I'm going to play this theme song. I've got a new theme song for this channel. It's going to be coming out soon. I think this might be the last time I play this particular theme song, unless I run into a bind and I have to use this old theme song, because I will keep it around because I want it or miss it or whatnot. But I'll tell you more about that in a minute, in a little bit, when we do the closing. All right. Well, let's get to it. Like I said, we're going to be asking the question, what if the problem is not a head issue, but a heart issue? With this guy that I was talking to, sometimes skeptics will masquerade the real problem with a head issue. They'll try to make you think it's an intellectual problem, when in reality it's a heart problem. Now you might get all theological and spiritual and say, well, it's always a heart problem. Yes, but some people's reason that they can't really accept something is because it really is an intellectual problem that's standing in their way, because their heart and their mind has to be on the same page. So, by the way, it's kind of raining in the background. Not in the background, my background, but outside it's raining. So forgive the thundering and lightning, and hopefully this my power will go out while I'm making this video. But yeah, the brain and their mind and their heart has to be on the same page. If the mind and the heart is not on the same page, then they're not going to be able to volitionally accept something as being true. They might cognitively accept it, but they don't it doesn't become a choice. You know, there was a Jewish guy named a Jewish scholar by the name of Picus Lapide, and he once wrote a work. From what I understand, I never read the work. This is what I understand. He wrote a work, and at the end of his book, he's a Jewish scholar. He's a Jew basically, and he acknowledged that the evidence for the resurrection does point in the direction that Jesus rose again from the dead. But he decides, I'm gonna stay a Jew anyhow. That's where his heritage is. That's where his lineage is. That's where his traditions are. That's where he's gonna stay. That's where his family is, possibly. Who knows? But your mind and your heart has to be on the same page. Now, some skeptics, their issue really is a heart issue, not a head issue. But they'll use their head issue as an excuse. As a Christian apologist, one of the things I do is I take away all of the person's excuses until they don't have one, and then they'll realize, oh, the real problem isn't because of the truth or the evidence or the arguments, it's me. That's the real problem. It's because I don't want to accept it. And that becomes the issue. But when it's a heart issue, now this particular person that I discussed this with, he wasn't trying to hide his heart issue. He has no delusions about it. He acknowledged, you'll see that in the post, he acknowledged that it's a heart issue with him. And it has nothing to do with head issue. He even acknowledged the possibility I might be right about Bart Ehrman, right about his arguments, right about the truth, whatever. He's willing to admit that. But the issue for him isn't up here. It's up here. It's down here, right here. And he knows this. He says it. He knows where his problem is. He knows where his issue is. It's not a head issue. When I have someone who has a head issue, it's a problem that I can resolve with facts, with arguments, with evidence, with reason. When someone has a heart issue, you got to get personal with it. You got to get to the core of the problem. His problem was that he was offended, that someone offended him. Someone hurt him deeply. He said he forgave them for it. The last post he wrote me, he said he forgave them for it. But someone hurt him deeply. And this forced him in a spiral downhill that ultimately ended up getting him easily influenced by Bart Ehrman. Because he was questioning doubts. He was challenging the very doubts that he had, the guy I talked to. So, but the problem is that, again, it's okay to doubt, but you got to understand your doubts have to, if your doubts don't have warrant. See, if I have a doubt, the first thing I find out is I want to know if my doubts have warrant. It's one thing to question the norm and doubt this or doubt that. It's another thing to not do anything about it. To not find answers, seek answers, look at the evidence, weigh the arguments. But when you have doubts and you have questions and you just let it sit there, it's just as bad as the people that try to teach you that it's bad to have doubts. It's just as bad because you're not looking for the answer. You're not trying to find the answer. The fact that you have doubts don't mean the doubts are warranted. All right. Well, let's get into it. All right. Well, it started out. I was looking on the comment section of Mike Winger's YouTube video on why you don't let Bart Ehrman interpret the Bible for you. This was actually taken out of a section of his one of his videos on evidence for the Bible when he was dealing with alleged Bible contradictions. So this guy right here replied to Mike's post and says, Bart is a historian, not a theologian. Mike makes no attempt at finding historical accuracy, which is not true. He did. It seems he has limited studies to just the Bible, which of course can be used as evidence, and so takes it for its religious value only. No, he doesn't take it for its religious value. And you can actually take it for a historical value. Historians and scholars use the Bible all the time as evidence. I point this out to him. I think I do. Bart has commented on using the Bible in this way, and his answer is something along the lines for go for it. When I first heard that, I thought that maybe he was saying that, okay, Bart Ehrman's against it. And I was like, wait, Bart Ehrman ain't against using the Bible as evidence. But I think that's actually what he's actually saying, is that he's saying, yes, you can use the Bible as evidence. Bart uses the Bible as evidence. Richard Carrier, who's a mythicist, used the Bible as evidence. So yes, you can use the Bible as evidence. This idea that you can't use the Bible as evidence, something that a lot of lay skeptics like to say, is just false. You can use the Bible as evidence. It's been used as evidence lots of times, even by skeptical scholars, even by some of the most radical of skeptical scholars. Even the Jesus Seminar have used the Bible as evidence. So this is just it's a no-brainer for scholars, but not a lot of lay non-Christians. They see it as using some sort of religious text, no different than the Book of Mormons or something. But the Bible is ancient literature written during ancient times, and everyone, no matter what they think about the dating, authorship, or any other side issues, agree on the time frame, at least the ancient time frame in which the Bible was written in, and nobody disagrees with that. And it can be used as a source, just like the Jewish Talmud is even used as a source when we're looking at Jewish history or something of that nature. It can be used as a source, and it can be used as evidence. Okay, he goes further. He says, however, for those who are looking to determine accuracy rather than mythology, this presupposed the Bible's mythology, which wasn't the case. He said, Bart is a gold mine of scholarship, which I later put, he's not a gold mine of anything. I'm sure you're a nice guy, Mike, but he's talking to Mike Winger, who's made this. But you don't, he said, but you don't begin to match the vast and comprehensive knowledge base of Bart Ehrman. And this is one of the reasons why I called him a Bart Ehrman worshiper. But the fact of the matter is that I've seen a lot of Mike Winger's videos, a lot of it, even some of his debates. He's actually pretty knowledgeable in terms of scholarship, and he often even directs himself to people that are actual scholars. Sometimes even has actual scholars and historians on his show, on his channel. So he is just as smart as Bart Ehrman. Really, I almost say this is almost an ad hominem attack against Mike. You're not as smart as Bart. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that are smarter than me. And you know something? I've actually debated someone that was a lot smarter than me, and I still won. It's not about how smart you were. In fact, he was so upset about losing the debate, he kept making big deal about how smart he was. You know, he kept saying he's at an IQ of 200, which I doubt. I question that one. And said, he said he was really, really smart, and how could how can I challenge what he's saying? Because he's really smart. I'm smart. But the point of the matter is, it's about the quality of the arguments. It's about the evidence. It's about the reasons. It's about what reasons you're using to justify your conclusion. It's about the issues. You can sit there and go all day long saying, hey, I'm a very smart guy. All right, I'm smarter than you. All right, how does that make your arguments right? How does that make your position true? It don't. It don't. In any given case, another guy replied back to him. Can't pronounce that name. But he said Bart's not a historian. But I came back and I said, a Bart Ehrman worshiper? You know, I was just kidding around. Laugh out loud. Bart Ehrman's only degree is in textual criticism, which is the case. But I have no problem if the guy wants to call himself a historian. Keep that in mind. Let me enlarge this. I want to make sure y'all can see it. I didn't think about maybe y'all not being able to see that. All right. Call himself a historian. In a technical sense, a historian can be defined as anyone who studies historical sources, which obviously Bart would qualify, but from an academic and legal perspective, one cannot practice as a historian unless one has at least a master's degree or higher in either this field or a similar area. Now note that what I just said there, because he will later say, oh, but Bart is a historian. I guess he thought I was questioning whether he was a historian. My question wasn't over whether he could call himself a historian. My issue was whether he knew some certain things like historical methodology that historians actually know, because he doesn't have academic training in that area. But he talks authoritative on it. Okay, I said Bart often speaks authoritatively on historical methods, except he has no college level training in this area. PhDs are very specifically focused degrees. In order to be trained in historical methodology, he would need to be trained at the academic level. Since he was not, then how does he know what is the proper historical methodology? I'm making a point. The only thing that makes sense to me, without assuming that he made it up, is that either he has taken the claim from other books that he read that has written about history, I presume he was the book that was about history or something, or he studied and observed how historians were practicing history. Of course, that also remains to be seen if he's observing historians that are critical historians, because critical historians may be practicing history a bit different than mainstream historians, professional historians. If it is easier, then the question would have to be what historians have been studying. Or if the earlier, then the question would have to be what historians has been studying. Although professional historians and mainstream historians practice nearly the same kind of methodology, critical historians, which is what I usually categorize Bart as, may not have the same kind of methodology as most mainstream historians. However, Bart introduces his method as it is practiced by most historians, when in fact it is not. Bart Ehrman actually accepts evidence from the Bible. When has he ever not? Like I said, I kind of thought that he was questioning whether that he was stating that Bart Ehrman didn't accept evidence from the Bible, but I think that it might have been the opposite, actually. Now I think about it. He himself has used evidence from the Bible, both in his books and in his debates. He doesn't think of the Bible as all myth. In fact, anywhere in scholarship and academia, we find evidence for the Bible acceptable. Besides, if the subject is over, if there are contradictions from the Bible, and Bart Ehrman is using the Bible to try to prove his point, then why can't we look in the Bible to see if it does? If a historian goes and tries to harmonize the difference between only three sources on the fire in Rome AD 64, Tacitus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius, then they are going to look at the evidence between these three accounts. They are not going to see what Josephus has to say about it when he never mentions it. This is not too hard to figure out. Bart Ehrman is not a gold mine for anything, like I said. I don't know of a single scholar that has more logical fallacies in his arguments besides Bart Ehrman. He mixes his speculations with facts, but has been known to present factual inaccuracies and misleading information. He appeals to authority and the majority quite often, although his consensus is often selective, bracketing those who are either believes in inerrancy or those outside of critical scholarship, which is most New Testament scholars. In short, I have often found his arguments really bad. Sorry you picked the wrong guy to worship. Blessings. He came back. Says, why would you call someone worshiper just because they put in a good word for someone. Of course, I was just joking, and I told him that next time. Especially in this case, which is for comparison purposes. Ehrman is a breath of fresh air, and he wonders why I was joking with that. For people like me who have been intentionally brainwashed to believe a particular religion as a child. It's not brainwashed to believe the truth. I felt, I'll be honest, I felt like I was brainwashed into Calvinism shortly after becoming a believer. And it took me a while to get out of that. But just because Calvinism is wrong, or just because a certain people are wrong about something, or just because a particular person that influenced you early on, or dragged you to church, or whatever was wrong, would not necessarily make the belief system of Christianity wrong. The belief system of Christianity is based on a crucified Messiah that died for your sins and rose again from the dead. That's what it's based on. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. None of us are perfect. And if we're trying to live up to the expectations of others, we'll always fail. But what this guy does is he has this expectation to live up to the expectations of others. And then when he can't live up to those expectations, he thinks the entire belief system itself is wrong. But that's not the case. People can make mistakes. Just because he says something, he continues, doesn't make it true, and the same said to you. I never said it did, and I even agree that wouldn't make it true. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're both wrong either. You'd have to look at the evidence. He is a historian rather than a theologian, even though I never once... one thing, I never denied him as call him a theologian. He's definitely not a theologian. And he certainly doesn't claim to be one either, and I agree with that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that if he touches on theological issues, he shouldn't defend them. If he touches on theological issues and makes theological assertions, and then refuses to back up what he's claiming here, and then uses the excuse, I'm not a theologian, then that's problematic. That's what he did in his debate with James White when he made theological assertions. And Barr has a tendency to do that. And, there's a particular King James on this who's a young earth creationist. And I take the position of young earth creationism, named Ken Hovind. And I take that position. But because he comes from a King James only perspective. And he often does that with King James Bible. He would sit there and try to force the King James translation on whoever he's debating, by trying to tell them, hey, look, that's not a King James Bible. You need to get a King James Bible. That's the authority. That's, and that sort of thing, assuming his standard, of course, which is the King James Bible. And when you ask to back it up, he says, oh, I'm no expert on the King James Bible translation. And, I don't have a problem with the guy personally. I've never met him. I've seen a lot of his videos. I've seen a lot of his debates. He debates pretty well for the most part. Other than coming from a King James only perspective, he's not the best representative of our position of young earth creationism, but he does come from that position of King James onlyism. And of course, but the problem I have is when he sits there, makes people think that, okay, you have to take this version, and then whenever he gets challenged, he says, I'm no expert. Bart does the same thing with theology. He does the same thing. He makes theological assertions and then backs out of it by saying, I'm no theologian, therefore I'm not going to defend my theological assertion. So he may not be a theologian, and he certainly isn't one, but he still makes theological statements. And reading further, you don't need a degree to be either. Never said you needed a degree to be considered either. I said you needed to be a degree to be practicing a historian. It is a matter of intent. Thank you for your lengthy reply. He wasn't used to my lengthy replies yet. I wonder why my words inspired such a strong and long-winded reaction from you, whoever you are. I told him not to be impressed with it because, I do long replies normally. Y'all seen enough of my channel to know that I usually do long replies. All right. I put back and I said, check back. I was just joking around about call you a Bart Ehrman worshiper. I mentioned that. That I wasn't serious. I thought it was clear from the context. Ehrman's arguments should never be viewed uncritically like that. He makes numerous factual inaccuracies and numerous logical fallacies within his arguments. That also flaws his reason. Probably should be reasoning. You can't be brainwashed with the truth. However, I do think Bart Ehrman has brainwashed many, but I think that just deviate away from the issues. Rather, I like focusing on the arguments, and his arguments are what is flawed. I never said he wasn't a historian in some sense of the word. In parentheses, I put reread the beginning portion of my reply to you regarding this in parentheses, but only that he is not trained in historical methodology at the academic level, all caps for emphasis, which still rings true. I also was never arguing that Ehrman was a theologian, but there are times when he will make claims that touch on theology, but then use the fact that he's not a theologian to get out of demonstrating his theological position. And he has theological positions, is even admitted by him. I also didn't say you need to a degree to be a historian. Rather, I said you need a degree to practice as a historian in the field of academia. For example, Ehrman can never teach at a university level on history nor practice as a historian on an archaeological dig like Craig Evans does. What makes him a historian in any sense of the word is the fact that he studies historical sources. But my point was that he lacks academic training in this area. Don't get too flattered by my lengthy reply. This is the kind of reply I usually make. I'm a bit long-winded and have a tendency to elaborate. It's not only important for me that you fully understand what I am saying, but that I demonstrate it as well, not just assert it. Also, I agree the fact that either of us assert something doesn't make it true, which is why I always challenge you to check out what I'm saying here, and you would never have to take my word for anything. However, to uncritically accept one over the other without checking the information out because he agrees with your thinking is doing just that. I was talking about because he uncritically accepts Bart, even though, you know, Bart is obviously wrong. Thank you for your response. Blessings. I shouldn't say obviously wrong. He's wrong because the evidence in fact shows him to be wrong. Alright, he replied, I wouldn't say Bart agrees with my thinking. I would say that he has raised certain issues. Excuse me. He has raised certain issues out loud or in books which I had previously questioned. This is when he started getting real. Please keep in mind that what I told you about my strict Orthodox upbringing. As a child, when I questioned some teaching, I was mocked or ridiculed. My heart actually went out to this guy because I'm sorry that he went through this. He shouldn't have had to go through this. See, this is one of the things that I'm doing this series for. It's for other Christians to see that when we evangelize the gospel, okay, we're not just throwing out a lot of information and then we're running on to the next person. These are real people, real lives with real stories, with real histories that might have felt like they've been hurt really bad by other Christians in the past. And that drove them down a very dark path. And we have to get real with this. We have to. We have to get on the ball and understand that a lot of these people feel like they've been hurt. Now, on his part, we ought not just abandon a belief system simply because we got offended by somebody in the belief system. Belief systems should be judged based upon whether it's true or not. Not on the basis of whether or not, well, so-and-so, hurt my feelings, and now I'm not sure what to believe. Now, I'm sure there's more to his story than that, I'm just simplifying everything. I'm basically saying, hey, look, you know, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. You know, if a church is that bad off, or if the people are like that, then maybe, I mean, the church is made out of millions and millions of different persons. Not everybody's like that. Not every denomination is like that. Not every church is like that. Not every preacher is like that. And you got to keep that in mind. You know, I went to 3 churches. Okay, I've only left one church badly. It was the first church I ever went to, because things happened in my life, things happened in that church, things got upset, and I left. And I left church for about a year before I would go back. When I went back to this one church for over 10 years. And during that time, lots of people there, even the pastor of the church, offended me multiple times. But I would never leave that church. Why? Because I knew that if I left when I got really upset or offended, that would be on me. If I left badly, that would be on me. Because if you leave on impulse like that, you're doing it because of an emotional reaction, which I'm not trying to be all spockish and, you know, because it's irrational, and yes, it is irrational because emotions can make you irrational. But I'm not trying to be all Star Trek-y or anything like that. But it can if you just respond purely on emotional reaction, it can lead to irrational judgments. You could end up doing something on impulse that you're going to regret later. This is why I like thinking through it. This is why we need both our hearts and our minds to think through these things. Our hearts can be deceived and manipulated. And we have to be careful not to be doing that. Alright. He goes further. He says, as a child, when I questioned some teaching, I was mocked and ridiculed. I left this faith as a young adult and stayed away from religion for decades. For decades. That was a lot longer than I stayed away. I credit Ehrman. Listen to this. This is why apologetics is so big. It's why it's so important right now in evangelism. I credit Ehrman, talking about Bart Ehrman, with significantly helping heal the deep wound created by the earlier teaching. In other words, he was able to creep into his heart when he felt offended and hurt and not allowed to question his doubts. This ought to ring true. This ought to ring home to all of us. It's not wrong. Okay, here's how it is. It's not wrong to question one's doubts. It's not because you don't have faith. It's not because you don't have Jesus. It doesn't mean you're not saved to have doubts. Gary Habermas has written extensively about this. He's talked about this. In one of my videos in one of my apologetic courses in Liberty University, he even talks about this. That doubt is acceptable. That it's not wrong to doubt. We ought to be able to doubt. But here's the thing. We shouldn't assume that just because we doubt or question, that means there's not a viable answer to those questions, or a resolution to our struggle, or a response to our doubts. Okay? It doesn't mean our doubts are warranted. And so when it comes to us as Christians, if somebody has doubts and someone is questioning it, don't ridicule for them, don't mock them, don't talk about how they're going to hell, don't do any of those things. Rather, instead, you're not going to help them if you do that to them. What's going to happen is that it's going to push them away further. What you need to do instead is help them with their doubts. Say, well, you want me to make them doubt more? No. Find the answers that they're looking for. say it's okay to doubt. Let's look at what you have these questions, right? Let's see if we can find the answers out together and help them out with it. All right. He says, okay, he credits that Ehrman was definitely helping him with the deep wound created by the earlier teaching. Since then, I find the subject of spiritual thinking the most interesting subject of all. This is kind of curious. Why would he be drawn to this if he was totally torn away from it? And I brought this up that it's probably a driving force to that it's God with this spiritual thing. We are ultimately created, because we're created in God's image, we're created as spiritual beings. We crave spiritual in that sense. Kind of like an inward desire for it. That's why over 99.9% of this planet Earth is somehow believes in some form of higher power. As human beings created in the image of God, we crave it. Alright, he goes further and he says, with this statement, I could go on and on, not only explaining what I mean in more depth, but also mentioning all the many aspects I have studied and continue to study. To just say a little, Christianity didn't start with Jesus. This is odd because I don't really even know what he meant by that, because that's, like I told him later, that's historically untenable. I mean, how do you back that up? He said Christ, meaning the anointed one. Okay, yes, Christ does mean the anointed one. He's the Messiah, and it comes from the Old Testament, like in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 9, which uses the Hebrew word Meshua. If I said that correctly. I can read Hebrew, but I have to look at the Hebrew to see how it's actually pronounced in the Hebrew, but I think it's Meshua in Hebrew. You got Christ, meaning the anointed one. Yes, so it's Meshua. It's basically the Greek equivalent to Meshua, Messiah. By the way, I didn't feel flattered. None of the things you mentioned about Ehrman matter to me. That's not why I mentioned the flattered part. But listen to what he says here, because this is important. This shows me that it was not a head issue for him. None of the things you mentioned about Ehrman matter to me. He doesn't care if he has bad arguments. He doesn't care if he has falsity, fiction stuff in his statements. He doesn't care about any of that stuff. He said, it may be true. He's saying everything I said in the previous post might be true. And he says, I don't care. It's apathy. It's I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And he says that the very next thing. He says it just doesn't matter. Okay, for me, he was one of several contributing energies that gave me what I needed to pull myself out of the place I was in, and consequently to discover a much, much better place, which I continue to discover every day. In other words, he was an emotional influence for him. I keep calling him, but it could be a girl. I don't know if it is or not. There's no picture here, and Sunny Today could be either a guy or a girl. I don't know. Alright. The person says, okay, or I respond back to say, okay, now you told me your story. It sounds to me like your issue, based upon what you have told me, is more of a heart issue than a head issue. And Bart came along and gave you some kind of intellectual solace. I say intellectual solace, but it's probably more of an emotional solace, as a way of satisfying your doubts based upon the hurt you felt from other Christians. Personally, and many Christian apologists feel the same way. I don't see doubt as a bad thing to begin with. There are some Christians that do, unfortunately, especially of the King James only variety, but this isn't me, or even from the perspective of a lot of Christian apologists. Now, you understand that a lot of the internet atheists are coming from a hyper fundamentalist background, to the point where a lot of them are coming from King James onlyists, traditionalists, hyper fundamentalist background. And because of that, that usually becomes the type of Christianity they're against. But in order to argue their points with all Christians, they make all Christians look like they're part, or at least the conservative ones, look like they're part of this hyper radical version of Christianity. And we're not, but they make it look like that. And so a lot of these internet atheists are coming from those kinds of backgrounds, usually. So usually it's the more extreme backgrounds that they're coming from that a lot of times they're fighting against in their anti-apologetic type of campaigns. All right, I go further. I say Gary Habermas has spoken extensively about doubt. Maybe you should read some of his stuff. Now, here's something I said in reference to how you deal with a situation where the issue is more of a heart issue. Say, now knowing that your issue is more of a heart than intellectual, maybe a different tact is in order. In other words, I can't deal with this guy like I normally deal with someone. Normally the way I deal with it is I deal with the arguments, evidence, sound reasoning, responses, responding to claims that are being made. That's usually what I do. But I knew that this guy would need a different tact, a different direction, because this guy, the problem isn't up here, it's here, where's where the issue actually was. The reality is that all Christians, including me, are just as guilty of making mistakes as you or anyone else. We're all human beings, and no one is perfect. This is why I am thankful that my hope rests in a perfect Savior. Christianity wasn't founded the belief that I can be perfect. It is based upon a perfect Savior that had died for my sins on the cross and had risen from the dead. If I have evidence for that, and I do, I don't sweat things like what if some Christians offend me, what some offends me. What if someone persecutes me because I don't agree with them, and they will. It is based upon Him, the one who gave His life for me. Why do you think you have a strong draw towards spiritual things? Even if you were a hardcore atheist, you might feel compelled toward these kinds of things. This is no accident. Now, he accused me of preaching too much. I wasn't trying to preach too much. I was trying to approach this from a different angle, because I could throw all the facts about Christianity and Jesus at him, and he'd be apathetic toward it. It won't matter to him. In fact, he might even agree with a lot of them, or at least for the sake of argument. But he wouldn't care. It wouldn't matter to him. So it would do no good. So what I was trying to do is approach this from the perspective of someone that's being sensitive to the situation, and at the same time offering some good advice and looking into the situation at least from his perspective. This is a guy that's been hurt by the Christians and needed answers in a very critical moment in his life that he didn't get answers. And that's sad to me. He should have gotten answers. And I'll be honest, when I first became a Christian apologist, one of the things that appalled me is that I learned about all these skeptical attacks, all these critical attacks, all these attacks by critics and skeptics and atheists and things like that. They weren't warranted. Now, I didn't just stop with my doubts and questions and didn't pursue it. No, I pursued it and looked into it. But the point is that I heard it for the first time from people promoting skepticism. I didn't hear it from the preacher. I didn't hear it from other Christians. I didn't even know about these things. In fact, these things were completely foreign to me when I first heard it. So as a Christian apologist, one of the things that I'll always want to try to do is get people out of the spell that, okay, I just want spiritual stuff. Don't talk to me about facts. Don't talk to me about evidence. Don't talk to me about doubts. Nobody's doubting here, but yet people do doubt. And they do question. And what are you going to do when that happens? When they are either questioning their faith, or someone is challenging their faith, or they're challenging your faith. What are you going to do? Preach a warm and fuzzy sermon to them? Maybe. But the reality is that we got to get on the ball, and we've got to be able to give them an answer. We got to be, and we got to be teaching this to our kids, teaching it to the congregation, teaching it to other Christians. Because at the end of the day, I should not have to hear this stuff from them before I hear it from people within the faith. We should be the first to talk about it, not the last. And that's one of the things that I had a problem with once I found out. Now, I found out my doubts weren't warranted. I found out there was strong evidence for Christianity. But the point is that I shouldn't have had to hear about these skeptics attacking Christianity from people that weren't even Christians. Christians should have been the first people I heard this from. I should have heard it from a preacher talking about what skeptics have said. I should have heard it from other Christians. Now, granted, I was a young Christian at the time. But it doesn't change the fact that a lot of Christians won't talk about that stuff. And there are a lot of Christians that do. Mike's one of those that do talk about it in his church. And I'm glad he talks about it in his church. I wish my pastor talks about it sometimes, but he doesn't do it as much as I would like. All right. Continuing. This is what I said. I don't know what you meant by Christianity didn't start with Jesus. I mentioned that. This would be historically untenable. When I mentioned to not be flattered by this, referring to what you said about my long post, it was not saying that in reference to Ehrman, but the usualness of my post being so long. Lastly, it sounds like you are saying rather Bart Ehrman is right or wrong. You don't care either way because he was a big influence of you early on after you early contact with other Christians. Now, I actually saw an interesting lecture by William Lane Craig. He was doing a Q&A, and one of the things he said and I thought at the time, well, he's just wrong about that. Until, this came up. And he said one of the biggest issues that's facing that he thinks is facing us is apathy. Where people just don't care about the answers. I didn't think that would be the case exactly until, I came across somebody that was apathetic about the truth. So maybe William Lane Craig ain't far from being wrong there, or far from being right there. All right. However, there are good influences and bad influences. We all have influences in our lives which contribute to our thinking and the way we are. But we should make sure that our influences are positive influences that influence our thinking in the right direction. And we should never allow such influences to prevent us from assessing the facts, making our own critical judgments, nor thinking for ourselves concerning these things. Anyhow, it's been fun. I have to go. Blessings. He comes back with a very short reply. He said, yes, it's been fun, but you really do preach too much, which I don't think I preached at all. That was just me approaching his art issue from a different perspective. It is a subtle art indeed to put out just enough to light a spark and then step back and let that person follow that spark where it leads. But to preach too much is to put out the very spark and then to light. No. Actually, exact opposite. But wasn't preaching at all, actually. There. He said, yes, it's been fun too, but you really preach too much? No, I don't think I preach too much at all, actually. It is subtle art indeed to put out just enough to light a spark and then step back and let that person follow that spark to where it leads. But to preach too much is to put a very spark meant to light. It's not putting out the spark at all to begin with. I'm all about planting seeds, but I wasn't preaching too much. I was simply dealing with the issue of his heart issue, and I was talking about that. And I'm an evangelist first, before I'm a Christian apologist. So I'm not going to sit there and miss the opportunity to preach the gospel to you, especially when the issue is his heart, not his mind. All with good intentions, I'm sure, but nevertheless true. No. Exact opposite, actually. I mean, if I'm going to talk about Jesus dying for his sins, how am I going to express that where it won't sound like it's preaching to you? Or like it's, because I'm talking about the gospel. I'm talking about what Jesus did for our sins. I'm talking about a theological view. How is it supposed to sound? How can I make it sound something different? I can't. It's what it is. But I'm not preaching too much. It is exactly what you need to hear. You just don't want to hear it. Okay, at the end of the day, it's all about heart, not head. You see that, what he said, right? Of course, it's actually about both. All right. I said, I don't think I preach too much, but when your issue is more of a heart issue than a head issue, I can throw up all the facts I want to all day long and get nowhere fast. This is why I approach your situation differently than I would normally. I would really like to see if you would one day come back to the truth. Christianity is the most factually based belief system I have ever seen. I am all about planting seeds. Hopefully something I said to you would eventually stick around as you think about these things. My issue was more of a head issue than a heart issue, which is what landed me into Christian apologetics in the first place. I study the facts and the evidence and become convinced by them that Christianity is true. Hope you one day will check out these facts for yourselves and I do wish you the best. Blessings. He said, I'll stick with Bart, is the only reply. I reply back, because I thought it was over at this point. I said, and I'll stick with truth, a.k.a. Jesus. At the time I said that, I really wasn't sure what I was going to say exactly. At first I wanted to say, well, then I'll stick with Jesus. That was the first thing I was going to say. Then I said, well, I could say I'll stick with the truth. But then I said, well, I'm saying that Jesus is the truth. And Jesus said, I'm the truth, the life, the way. And he that comes to, no man can come to the Father except by me. And so I said instead, and I'll stick with truth, and I put capital T there intentionally, aka Jesus. Because Jesus is the truth, according to Jesus' own words and according to Paul. But Jesus is the truth. And so, anyway, he replied back. I didn't expect him to. I thought this was over at this point. I know you mean well, and so I forgive you, just as I learned to forgive the people in my early life. Forgive me for what? I started thinking about that before I made this video, because at the time I didn't even think about what I replied. I didn't even put it down in my reply. But I started thinking about it when I was reading through them again, and it's like, forgive me for what? I didn't do anything wrong. Telling somebody the truth is not wrong. In fact, it would probably been very helpful to him if someone did that with him early on, before Bar got his clutches into him. But instead, he got some terrible influences that came his way. There's nothing wrong with telling somebody the truth and showing them and demonstrating it's true. There's nothing wrong with talking to them about Jesus. There's nothing to forgive. I don't need his forgiveness because I haven't done anything wrong. I really haven't. All right. Maybe he just, I don't know what he means by this, to be honest. It's weird. Forgive me for what? What did I do? Okay. He goes further and says, the best part of Jesus is Mark 5-7, the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes aren't Mark 5-7. It's Matthew 5-7. I didn't think about this at the time, and I didn't put it in my other replies. But I actually said, wait a minute, that don't sound right. I don't think the Beatitudes is in Mark, and it's not. The Beatitudes are in Matthew, and there's possible reference in Luke. Luke records an event called the Sermon on the Plains, which is similar to Sermon on the Mount. But I don't know whether or not if the Beatitudes in there or not. Some people say these are the same event. Some people say they're two different events. I don't know. I have to look that up to see that for sure. But either way, I think he meant, because I looked it up, and it's probably likely referring to Matthew 5-7. All right. As a dedicated Jew, Jesus was no doubt taught these things as part of his Jewish education. What's your point on this? I have no idea. We can strive to reach this goal. When the Jesus movement became institutionalized, I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but I assumed at the time he meant as a religion or a religious group. That's what I assumed at the time. But he makes some weird statements about hundreds of years later and things like that. You'll see that in a second. It suffered corruption, which is inevitable, and the corruption only grew throughout the centuries. What? Okay, the New Testament is written in the 1st century. All of the New Testament is written within living memory, including the 4 Gospels. The 4 Gospels are not really written that far apart from each other. Even if I look at liberal dates, we're usually looking at within 20 to 30 years apart. Even that's liberal dating. That's the latest of the dates. The earliest Mark is usually dated between 8065 and 8070, with most liberals following 8070, most conservatives following 8065 or before. There are conservatives that do fall earlier than 8065. There's people that put Mark all the way in the 40s. I don't go that early with Mark, but I do think Mark is probably 8059, 8060. But regardless, whether you're talking about within 30 to 40 years of Jesus' lifetime, okay, that's only one generation. All 4 Gospels, and that including all the way to the last of the 4 Gospels, which is John, is written within less than 2 generations, within less than 80 years of the life of Jesus. None of these are hundreds of years removed from each other. None of these are hundreds of years removed from the event. So, even if someone made up stuff over the centuries, the New Testament's already been written. So I don't really understand his criticism there. It's like he doesn't know this information or something. I don't know. He's apathetic about it, so I don't think it matters to him. But either way, to me it's important because truth matters. Excuse me. Truth matters, as I put in my next post. He says, "You are very much in your head, and truth will never be found there." He thinks that truth can only be found in your heart and can never be found in your mind. Your mind and your heart both have to be involved. They both have to be on the same page. Because your heart can be deceived, actually. Your heart can be deceived in thinking something's true that's not. This is why I'm always careful never to say follow your heart. Although follow your heart sounds very noble to say, the reality is that your heart is able to be deceived. And you say, well, your mind can be deceived too. I agree. That's why you need both your heart and your mind. You can't just think your way through it, but you can't just feel your way through it either. You have to do both. All right. I think through my issues, but my heart guides me as well. It's a two-way street, as I tell them in the next post. Okay, when the Jesus movement became institutionalized, okay, we got that. It suffered corruption, which is inevitable, and the corruption only grew throughout the centuries. This is incorrect. And I mentioned oral cultures to him. I will talk to him about oral cultures for a little bit. He never challenged me on it yet. I haven't seen him challenge me on it yet, at least. But I told him, I told him where my video is, and I'll show you that in a minute. And oral cultural studies, and I have done extensive amounts of oral culture studies. I got books over here. I got books right here, and and I'm doing a book on old culture background in the New Testament actually, and they managed to consistently maintain the gist, the essence of the story. The essence of the story never changed over time. It's just the wording, the way which the story is told, the choice of words used, like when you're abbreviating something and summarizing it so it can be memorized and passed along in an oral culture, that sort of thing. Now that's what I assumed he was talking about, and since I just did a video not too long ago, the first part of my Bart Ehrman series, so I referenced that. You are very much in your head, and truth will never be found there. Truth can only be found in your heart. It's found both in your head and your heart. And it's really not even something that's just in your head and your heart. Your head and your heart is only tools to find the truth. The truth is actually something that's not always as easily built into a person. You can only find the truth with logic if you have already found the truth without it. That's a weird statement to make. Logic is based on the laws of logic, which are universal, they're non-material, they are true no matter what, no matter where you go, and we use logic on an everyday basis. We do. And even people that make logical fallacies all the time recognize the role that logic plays in our thinking. All right. He says, I wish you the best in your search. Now I came back. Said, I thought our conversation about this was over. A bit confused because it sounded over. Anyway, the Jesus tradition didn't receive corruption. I didn't really catch the centuries part there at the time. I have extensively studied oral cultures. Although the wording changes over time, how the story is told, the way the story is told, etc., the gist or the essence of the story remains consistent. In fact, one of my new series is on Bart Ehrman, and it is called the Bart Ehrman series, in which my first video is actually dedicated to the oral culture arguments of Bart Ehrman, in which I respond to several clips of a particular debate that Bart Ehrman has with Peter Williams. I cite from some of these sources showing you exactly what oral culture studies really say. This video can be found here, and then I give them the link for that video. Okay. I go further. I says, also, truth is a two-way street, as already mentioned. Namely, it requires both your head and your heart being on the same page. Personally, I think living in a so-called postmodern culture, people have undervalued truth. To some people, truth is this valueless commodity where everyone's truth is equally valid or it doesn't matter. In other words, apathy, being very apathetic about it. However, I value truth. Truth matters to me. To me, truth is a priceless commodity that is only waning thin in the hearts and minds of many. I don't wish to undervalue truth, nor keep it on the shelf somewhere collecting dust. I believe in the truth. If I don't have it, then I want it. If I have it, then I don't want to part with it. This doesn't mean that I can't change my mind, nor does it mean that I'm not open-minded. But this does mean that my objective and goal is always truth. It's sad to see others that don't feel the same way I do about truth. It's sad to see, feel the same way about truth. But maybe one day you'll change your mind on this. I know what you're thinking. Don't hold your breath. But as a Christian, I have to hold out for hope for you. If there's hope for me, then there's hope for you. I believe this. Does this mean one day you'll definitely be saved? I didn't mean that he wouldn't be saved. I meant that there's no guarantee that he'll be saved unless he makes that choice. And I said, no, but it does mean maybe, just maybe, you'll change your mind and your heart, and you'll come to Jesus. Hope is never lost. Blessings. Now, he has not written me back about that since. He has not written me back since that. That was the other day. I waited to see if he would post back. He has not. So, I don't know if he will after I publish this video or attempt to upload it to YouTube. But either way, regardless, if he does, I'm still probably not going to be producing another video in a while unless I really get the urge to. Alright, let's Click back over. All right. Wow. Yeah. Sometimes the skeptics you face, the issue is not intellectual. It's emotional. They've been hurt. They've been offended. Now, there's a proper way to handle doubts if you have doubts. And there's a proper way to handle it if you approach somebody who's having doubts. If the person is having doubts, don't ridicule them. Don't criticize them. Don't make it look like they just don't have enough faith. Don't do that. All you're going to do is make things worse and push them further and further down that hole they are now already driving. Now, if you are having doubts, now understand that doubts is not a bad thing, but it is bad to assume that just because you have doubts and questions, that means your doubts and questions are warranted. We have to go, and once we find out that we have these doubts and questions, we then pursue it to see if there's appropriate answers for our questions and doubts. We look at the arguments, we look at the evidence, we look at the reasons, we start weighing our options. We do all that stuff. We actually seek out information from credible sources. That's how we find this stuff out. Don't let your doubts rule you. Don't let yourself pick at them until they become more than just doubts. And if you're a Christian, don't criticize somebody just because they have them. Help them resolve their issues. And pray for them, obviously, but also pursue it to help them get answers. All right. With that said, I do have a number of things that's going to be different in my channel. I'm making lots of different changes. I'm also attempting to try to expand my ministry out as well. It's going to include other things. I'm thinking about making a website and so forth. But I've got a new theme song that's coming up. It will be in the next video. I'm going to be doing a Bart Ehrman video. Bart Ehrman, the Bart Ehrman series, part 2. I don't know what the subtitle is going to be called yet. Also, the way I'm titling my videos is also going to change. Whenever I would main title, instead of having a colon and things in parentheses, and it just kind of just all messy and sporadic, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just kind of put the line in between the main title and the subtitle instead. The part number might still be in parentheses, like this in this video. If it's just a main title, like when Skeptics Respond just has one title, I'm not subtitling these videos. In which case, it will just be one title and with the part number in parentheses. But if it's multiple titles, then it'll be separated by a line. All right. So I think that's a neater, more professional looking way of doing it. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have end screens at the end. I got a new theme song that's already made. I just didn't produce it for here because I wanted to be able to play my old theme song finally last. I've got the high quality mic and camera that I've had for a while. But when I made that theme song, I did so with my old camera. And before I knew as much as I did about technology, and before I start using OBS instead of Zoom, now I use Zoom, or not Zoom, but I now use OBS, and I'm a lot more technology savvy on my videos and a little bit better in terms of audio and visual quality. And so I'm doing some new stuff with my channel. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. All right. With that said, I won't be, like I said, I won't be doing another when Skeptics Respond. I probably will eventually do another when Skeptics Respond, but it might be some time later. It could be a long time later. I don't know. It depends on if I really, really feel the urge to do it. But I won't just do it just to be doing it because someone responded to my post or whatever. Or someone gets into a debate with me or something like that. I'll let most debates slide for the time being unless I get the really strong urge to do it this way again. But in the meantime, and this is an open-ended series, so I can add other videos later on down the road. But for right now, I'm not going to be producing another video for a while unless I really strongly feel the urge that really needs a video to discuss something else in the comment section. All right. With that said, remember, always stay in the know and learn the facts the critics don't want you to know. And I will see you on the next one.